Oh, all right. So Haraim Tovim, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me for another session of a how-to of Jewish prayer. I'm Rabbi David Eli Grundland, and hopefully you know that. If you're here, and if not, nice to meet you, and I look forward to speaking more and learning together more in the future. So we are in the part 3. I'm not sure if I said part 2 before. We are in part 3 right now of our series, the how-to of Jewish prayer, really giving the basics of what tefillah, what Jewish prayer is all about, and how to do it. The idea being, in a situation like we all find ourselves, where we are at home. By the way, welcome to my new background of my home office as opposed to my office. As we're at home a lot and we don't necessarily have somebody leading every tefillah service that we're at, it becomes a lot harder sometimes to navigate the service. When do I stand? When do I sit? What are the prayers? What comes first? What comes second? What's the order? Why is this the order? Why are we doing these things? So that's really what we're trying to address in this series. How to first engage with Jewish prayer, like what are we supposed to be doing? And also, how are we supposed to be thinking about it as we go through it? We talked about this in our first class, the idea of keva, kavanah, the established versus the intentional. We talked about that more last week as an underlying theme of every one of the tefillot as they come in their order, in their exact place. That is, there's a level of established prayer and a level of personal intention that we're supposed to imbue into that prayer. So now we're going to move on. We're just going to continue with what we were doing last week. Last week, we concluded with the part of the service called the Amidah, or Shmona Esrei. We differentiated between the Shmona Esrei, the 18 benedictions that we say during the week, at our evening Mariv, at our morning Shacharit, and at our afternoon Mincha prayers, that during the week it consists of actually 19 blessings, originally 18, but one was added, not recently, 1800 years ago or so it was added. But it was added to the list, so it's now the 19 benedictions that we go through. There are 3 that introduce, talk about the fathers, talk about our history, our ancestors, talk about God's strength over all of creation, talk about the uniqueness of God, and then goes into the section of bakashot, which is the request, but really more aligning ourselves with the divine will in all sorts of different parts and points of our lives. And then finally, the section of hoda'ah, thanksgiving, which leads us to a place of shalom, of peace. The goal being, remember, there were 3 parts of our tefillot. There was our shevach, our bakasha, our hoda'ah, our praise, our asking, and our thanksgiving. That is those 3 sections of the Amidah. And again, it is from a place of going through that and getting to the level of thankfulness that we are able to achieve our inner peace. And really, that's God willing. We should all work towards that. And as a collective, we should achieve world peace through the same mechanism. If everyone only understood how much gratitude or how amazing it is that we exist in this day and age and everything that happened to get us here. And everyone really tried to align themselves with the available opportunities in their lives on these 13 different levels. And then everyone was just so grateful for the things they had and the things they hoped for and the things they longed for. We would all achieve a pretty decent level of personal peace, which would then have a grander world peace outcome, which is part of what we are going through and part of what we're praying for in our prayers. Now, we're going to move on from the Amidah, though, to the next section in our Siddur for Shacharit. And this can be found, it could be found on page 119. And I'll explain that in a moment. But it's also found page 124. And at Beth Emes, we tend to skip all of that most of the time. And we go to page 132. We look at 124. It is a section called Tachanun. Tachanun is the idea of supplication, right? It starts off with Hu Rachum, that God is compassionate or God is merciful. And we talk about God a lot as El Rachum V'Chanun, a God of mercy and compassion. If you were with us at our last Wednesday class, the delving deeper into Jewish prayer class, you would have heard about the idea that the whole purpose of God's creation was so that it could be called by its names, Rachum and Chanun, merciful and compassionate. And so here we are saying that God is merciful. And the whole section of Tachanun in its longer form is, and even in its shorter form, it's about looking to God for compassion. See, when we are in the Amidah, we're supposed to have a very profound personal experience and relationship with God happening. And yet, as we all know, we go through our prayer on a daily basis quite quickly, which is part of the reason for this. So we know what to expect and we know what's coming. And so even though we're supposed to be involved in a really profound relationship, we don't always experience that profound relationship, right? Imagine there was somebody who you really wanted to spend some time with, and you picked up the phone and you gave them a call, and the moment they answered and said hello, you're like, oh, hey, it's so great to speak to you. Anyway, I gotta go. Talk to you later. Bye. Oh, it's not much of a relationship you're engaged in. And something came up, so you had to leave or you had to go a little quick with the conversation. Regardless, you may call them back later, or you may send a text message or an email saying, I'm sorry I had to go so fast. Well, Tachanun comes right after the Amidah, comes right after this close connection to God, because of that, because of the idea that we're not as involved in that relationship as we maybe should be, or we maybe could be. And so we engage in this next section to really say, I know I'm falling short. I recognize that, and I recognize I could be doing better. And that's Tachanun. There is some choreography to Tachanun, which we'll talk about, I believe, next time we're doing choreography of prayer. And that is, it's also called, as you can see on page 132, Nifilat Apayim, which means falling on our faces. It's the idea of, if you're really upset about something, right? You know, I'm trying to think of like a soap opera, right? Where somebody will throw themselves down and weep on the bed, right? There's an idea here too. We're supposed to almost throw ourselves down upon our arms and weep for the fact that our relationship with the Creator, our Creator, is not where it could be, perhaps not where it should be. This is the section called Tachanun. That is on what we do at Beth Emes, page 132, and then we skip to 136. There's a tradition that on Mondays and Thursdays we do an elongated version, or we could do an elongated version, which would start on page 124. It includes, I believe, 7 quite lengthy paragraphs. Same kind of supplication and longing and praising of God. A lot of similar language, interestingly enough, that we use in the prayers on the high holidays. And that also includes this poetic page on 134 in the ArtScroll Siddur. Anyway, Tachanun then concludes on 136. And that's really what that section is for. I believe I actually missed something that I should have spoken about before Tachanun, which is just to briefly touch on the idea of Shabbat and holiday Amidas, which I think I talked about briefly last week, but just as a summary, that the middle section, the 13 request sections, don't exist on Shabbat and holidays. They're not days for requests, they're days for acknowledgement. So we just acknowledge the day. Sorry, so that's a little out of place, but I just wanted to reintroduce that concept. Anyway, we have Tachanun. Tachanun is only done on non-celebratory days. That's to say that not on Rosh Chodesh, not on any Jewish holidays, not on Shabbat, because these are days we're celebrating. These are days that have simcha, that have joy in the day. And Tachanun is something of almost an emotional sadness of what we are lacking, what we are missing, what we are longing and yearning for. And so we don't say Tachanun on joyful days. And we also don't say Tachanun the entire month of Tishrei after Yom Kippur, because once Yom Kippur has happened and we've been absolved of everything we've done wrong, that carries us through the rest of the month. How can I be sad? I was just absolved of everything. I'm free to go, clean slate. Let's coast. Right? So we can be happy with that. Similarly, it does not happen for a week after Shavuot, because it's a continuation of the joy of the holiday. It lasts for a week. Yeah, Bernie.
Sorry, are you taking questions now or should I wait till the end?
I'm happy to take questions now.
Okay. So my recollection was we didn't always say Tachanun at Beth Emeth.
Yes.
My memory is not great these days, but it only started like around the late 80s, early 90s kind of thing.
It was more recent than that, actually.
Was it?
It was much more recent than that we started saying it.
Why?
So at Beth Emeth, we didn't say Tachanun. There was actually something from Rabbi Price, who was essentially the Mara D'Atra of the city back in probably the 40s and 50s. And he had a number of very top brand students, including our own Rabbi Kelman, who founded the Beth Emeth Beis Yehuda synagogue community. And the opinion was you can find joy every day. And there are certain traditions within the Hasidic community. If you can find a Rebbe who passed away on that day, so the Rebbes and in the Zohar it's taught that the day that a Rebbe passes away is actually a day of celebration because their neshama is more in the world. And so you can find a reason to be happy every single day. And so therefore, Tachanun's kind of passé. And also the sense was in a community where not everybody was as observant, that it might be, we talked about it previously, I believe, as a tircha, as something that would hold back the congregation. It was an extra thing that was more tradition. It was not necessary, so it was left out. I believe it was in 2006, during the Second Lebanon War, where we introduced Beth Emeth introduced into our tefillot that after the Amidah, we would sing the Shomer Yisrael paragraphs that are on page 136. And we sang them really as this extra pleading, this extra prayer, talking about the land of Israel. It was in the middle of a war. There were Katyushas coming and landing on houses, in communities, on homes, miracles upon miracles in terms of how they were missing and not hurting people. But still, it was a very dangerous situation. And so we started singing Shomer Yisrael as part of our tefillot. And even after the war the ceasefire had been declared, we maintained it. There was actually within the minyan itself, there were people who really appreciated and liked singing the Shomer Yisrael paragraphs. And so as it was decided to keep it as part of the daily davening and the daily liturgy, it was also decided that we would include the full regular Tachanun. That is the shortened version, the one that is done on non-Torah reading days, the shorter one, which is just 132. You skip the poem on 134 and go straight to 136. That's kind of how it made its way into the practice at Beth Emeth. I still thinking that to do the Monday, Thursday full version from 124, that would still be a tircha. That would be too much for people. Those paragraphs the poetry is beautiful. But if you're not really into it, it's very long and it's very hard. Though most Orthodox congregations do continue to say that full one on Mondays and Thursdays. The reason for Mondays and Thursdays saying that full one, according to a tradition, is that Moses was born and died on the same day, on the 7th of Adar. But the year that he was born, that was a Monday. The year that he died, that was a Thursday. And so because of that, there's a certain level of auspiciousness. I'm not sure if that's the proper word, but there's auspiciousity. I don't know. There's something auspicious about Mondays and Thursdays to have our prayers heard, because Moshe was the one who knew how to pray, and there's a lot of lines that are actually quoting his tefillot within those paragraphs. So it was ascribed to a Monday and Thursday thing, which also happens to be Torah reading days. So if we're going to make it a little bit longer, let's make it a little bit longer. Okay, moving right along into Torah reading. Is there a second question there?
Sorry, just two very short comments on what you just said, if you don't mind, then we'll shut up. Number one is the old Shar Shalom synagogue, Mondays and Thursdays, they did the full Tachanan. And you're right. I mean, as long as the service was longer those days, this just made it even that much longer.
Right.
So that was one thing. The other thing that I just want to mention, you mentioned the Shomer Yisrael, is when we were in Israel, your mother was there with us on the Poland-Israel trip. On the Shabbat morning, we went to the synagogue, Shira Chadasha, and there was a young man who had been called up to an aliyah, and after he was finished, instead of singing Siman Tov and Mazel Tov, they sang Shomer Yisrael, which I couldn't understand. So I asked Rabbi Morrison, and he just kind of shrugged his shoulders. So I asked our guide, Batzalel, and he told me because this young man is about to be inducted into the army. And he got an aliyah because of that, and because of that, that's what they sang instead of Siman Tov and Mazel Tov.
Very nice.
Anyway, so okay, carry on.
No, that's great though. That's a great comment, right? The reason it's great is because it gives us, again, a little bit more kavanah that we can then infuse into our keva. As we sing Shomer Yisrael, there are a few levels. You can sing about Shomer Yisrael, God who keeps Israel, just as a spiritual reality that we as a Jewish Israelite nation continue to exist in the world. That's one level. And then on another level, we can really look to our chayalim, to our soldiers in Israel in the IDF. Okay, we're going to move along now. On to page 138, where we find the section of Torah reading in the Siddur. Torah reading is done on Mondays and Thursdays, and also on Saturday mornings and Saturday afternoons at Mincha. The reason for Mondays and Thursdays, according to the Talmud, those were the market days. That is to say that the Torah was taken out and it was read in the market day when most people were out and about and most people would have the opportunity to hear it. And so Monday and Thursday was the day it was declared as the days we would publicly read Torah. Now, the reason there was
Sorry, Rabbi, you're saying that the Torah was actually taken out into the market so people could hear it?
Yes.
Okay.
And the reason that was done was actually something that comes out of this week's Torah reading. So this week's Torah reading is, just to date ourselves, we are on January 25th, 2021. This week is the week where we will be reading Parashat Bishalach, the Torah reading where the Jews have already left Egypt and we get blocked up against the Reed Sea and the sea splits and we are able to cross through on dry land and the sea covers over the Egyptians and their army and we get to the other side and sing the great song to God, Az Yashir Moshe, also part of our daily liturgy towards the end of the Psukei de Zimra section. At that point, it says they walked for 3 days and they didn't find water. And our sages looked at that statement and they said, Ein Maim Ela Torah. That when it says they didn't find water, when the Torah uses water, it's using it as a metaphor for the Torah. And so it says they went for 3 days and they never stopped to study or learn any Torah. And so with that, our sages declared we should never go more than 2 days without hearing the Torah. And so therefore, we never go more than 2 days without hearing the Torah as part of our services. We read on Saturday morning, then we skip Sunday. On Monday, we read Torah again, skip Tuesday, Wednesday. On Thursday, we read again, and then skip Friday. And Shabbat, we read again. This is, again, breaking it up, so we never go 3 days without hearing or learning any Torah. And so we have this Torah service that we have during the week. And that service in the Siddur takes us through page 148. After that, we have a section called the conclusion of Shacharit, the end. All of that stuff, the Torah reading, the Tachnun, it's potentially part of the conclusion, but it's not really. It is more an additional section that flows from the Amidah. The Amidah, this moment where we're connecting to God, all of this flows out of that idea. Remember, Tachnun is lamenting for the connection to God that could have been, but we weren't as engaged as we could have been. Torah reading comes from empowering and strengthening us within that relationship. And then we get back to Ashrei. We repeat Ashrei again at the end of the service. This is really the conclusion. It's 3 paragraphs, Ashrei, and then another section from Psalms, from Tehillim, Lam Natseach, which is all about God bailing us out of hard times, really saying, let's have a good day ahead. And it's going to be God who's going to give us a good day ahead. And then we go to Uva L'Tzion, which is about redemption, and redemption really through connecting to our relationship with God and with Torah. And the Uva L'Tzion is 154 to 156. So we're talking now about, this is our concluding section of the prayers, which leads us then to Aleinu L'Shabeach, which is the final prayer.
Rabbi?
Yes.
So is Ashrei apart from the Torah service?
Yes.
Okay.
Ashrei is a separate prayer. Well, I'm going to actually put a caveat on that.
Okay.
In Nusach Ashkenaz during the week. And what I mean by that is in Nusach Sfard. So I believe in our first class, we talked about the idea that there's something called a Nusach, which is a traditional ordering of the prayers and of the language of tefillah, of the language of prayer. Again, I don't really like that word prayer, but that's what we're working with. And in Nusach Ashkenaz during the week, we take out the Torah, we read the Torah, we put away the Torah, and then we continue with the service. On Shabbat morning, we take out the Torah, we read the Torah, and then we say Ashrei, and then we continue and then put away the Torah. Some other prayers in there as well with Ashrei. And it's a different ordering. In Nusach Sfard, which is some connection. Well, first Nusach Edut Mizrach, which is from Jews who came out of Spain and Morocco. We call them the Sfardim, right? They always do that during the week. Even they take out the Torah, read the Torah, say Ashrei, and then Ashrei Lam Natseach Uva L'Tzion, and then they put away the Torah, and then they conclude with Aleinu. So where Ashrei falls in this whole dynamic is actually it's a very good thing you're bringing up here, Monty. It depends on your tradition. For us, in our tradition, it is separate from the Torah service. For them, and even for us on Shabbat, it is almost part of the Torah service. And the reason it becomes part of the Torah service is the words of Ashrei itself. Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha Od Yahalu Chasela, that praiseworthy or happy is the one who is dwelling in your house. And this is almost a declaration. And so, when we have the Torah and we have it out, this is when we're saying, Hashem, now is when we can really dwell in your house. And especially, as I was saying, when we go through Uvalet Zion, it goes through the idea of redemption, but redemption as it pertains to our connection to Torah, hence the last line, right? Hashem chafetz l'ma'an tzidko, God desires for the sake of his righteousness, yagdil Torah ve'yadir, that we should make Torah great and show its beauty. And so it brings it all together. It includes those whole ideas within the Torah service and not as something separate. That said, it doesn't really matter either way. One is not right, one is not wrong. They're both true, 100% right and accurate ways of achieving the goals of tefillah and of prayer.
Okay, so in your opinion then, if one is davening alone and reads the Torah from a Chumash after doing the Torah and the Haftarah, do you proceed to Ashrei or do you skip over it?
Proceed directly to Ashrei.
Okay.
And yeah, I would definitely not skip it.
Okay.
There's actually a statement in the Talmud, in the Tractate Brachot, where a lot of the things that I'm saying actually come from the Tractate of Brachot. The statement says that if you say the Ashrei 3 times a day, you're guaranteed a place in the world to come.
Okay.
I don't actually know what that means, but the idea is that we say Ashrei twice in the morning, right? Once when we said it earlier during Psukei de Zimra, once when we're saying it now, or before Aleinu, after Torah reading, and the third time being before Mincha, before the afternoon prayer. Or part of the afternoon prayer is a recitation of Ashrei. Again, the whole concept of Ashrei is one of being in God's presence, right? Sitting in God's presence, sitting in God's house, recognizing that as we are and as we go through the world, we are constantly trying to recognize our place in the world as sitting in God's world. And then we get to Aleinu. That's on page 158 and 160 in the Art Scroll for during the week. And Aleinu in this situation comes at the end of all of our tefillot, and it is a summary. It is the summation of it. And one of the nice hints to Aleinu being a real declaration, a summary of everything we've said, is that the first and last letter of both of the paragraphs of Aleinu, the first letter is an Ayin, and the last letter is a Daled, right? And the two letters, Ayin and Daled, spell the word aid, which means to bear witness. That is, we've gone through this entire process of our morning prayer service with what we're doing now. We're about to move into the afternoon, evening services. But we've gone through this whole prayer service. And now we're at a point where I almost want to just say this was worthwhile. This whole experience was a meaningful, worthwhile experience. And the way I do that is by this declaration of, I did this standing in front of God, right? And that's what we say. We bend our knees, we bow, we give thanks before the King, King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed is he, or is it. And then we have the second paragraph. Also, the first letter is an Ayin, Al Kain, and the last letter is a Daled from Echad. Again, saying with the second one that we are declaring that we will have no idols, and that truly we long for a time where the entire world will recognize God's unity. And that's what we've been trying to do this whole time. And again, it starts with an Ayin, ends with a Daled. Aid, it is a bearing witness. Another brief aside, because we're going to have lots of those, is the first line of Shema Yisrael, right? The declaration of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, in a Torah, and maybe even in our Sidurim, yeah. The Ayin is bold on the word Shema, Shin Mem Ayin, and the Ayin is very big. And then the last word, Echad, is Aleph Chet Dalet, and the Dalet is very big. The simple reason is to say, remember, it's an Ayin and not an Aleph. It's Shema, listen, and not Shema, maybe. And remember, it's Echad, one, and not Acher with a resh, which means other. The fear there being somebody will misread it and perhaps say, maybe Israel, that Hashem, who's our God, is actually a different Hashem, right? It's Hashem Acher, God forbid, right? So it says it very big. Listen, Israel, Hashem, our God, Hashem is one. It's a unit. It's a unified entity. And again, this is us bearing witness, because the big Ayin plus the big Daled is again aid. This is our bearing witness to God's unity in the world that we do in the Shema. We do it again here in Aleinu. Afterwards, after Aleinu, we have the daily song. There's a couple of questions. Let me just get through this next bit, and then I'll address those questions. After that, we have our daily psalm, where every day we go through a recitation of one of the songs that were offered in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple, by the Levites, who were the singers in the temple, and they would sing these songs ultimately to elicit the proper emotions that people were supposed to be experiencing, right? Think about how we all feel on Monday, right? Oh, Monday. So they sang a song just to kind of wake everybody up for the week, right? How do we feel on Wednesday? Hump day, hardest day of the week. So much going on. So much has been happening. So much is yet to happen, right? What's the right song for Wednesday? Get us in the right mood for Shabbat. And that's what the daily song does. And it goes through this day after day, that the Levites would sing the song to bring us into the right spirit of the day. Now, where this falls in the service, we do it at the very end. Some traditions put this before Aleinu. Some people will put it before the Torah reading. Some people will put it during the Birkot HaShachar, in that first introductory section of our tefillot, because there's a lot of talk of the offerings and things that went on in the temple. Some people will put that there. Again, just different traditions, different customs. None is right, none is wrong. They're all good, they are all valid, they're all worthwhile, and we follow what we do, right? There is no saying one way is better than the other, except to say that with every neshama and every level of tradition that we each have in our own traditions, we experience a certain level of connection and comfort with that. If it was done differently, that would feel weird, and that's not what we're supposed to feel. So we hold to our own traditions. That is part of the reason for the importance of minhag in Jewish thought, and even in halacha, in Jewish law. So I've had a couple of questions before, so if you want to ask, now's a good time. So yeah, Bernie, you were going to ask?
Yeah, so just going back to Aleinu, I seem to recall, and you'll tell me if I'm wrong, of course, that there's like a sentence, I think in the first paragraph, that I'll say was there originally, now it's kind of optional, but you're not supposed to, and it had something to do with Jesus. But that's all I remember.
So you are accurate, and it had something to do with Jesus, and it was it was ultimately, it's more of a generic line. It's actually in the Art Scroll Siddur, if you have it. So if we're back on 158, since the end of the third line is the first word, so the third and the fourth line, and the line is Shehem mishtachavim lahevel varik umitpalalim el lo yoshia, which means that they, talking about the idolatrous nations of the world, bow down to air and nothingness. Hevel is your air, but it's nothingness, right? And are bowing and are praying, or are mitpalalim. Remember, we talked about the idea of that introspective envisioning. They expect that this false god that can't actually redeem them from anything, that they are envisioning toward that. They are longing for that non-entity to help them out. But we don't, and then it moves on. Va'anachnu korim, but we bow down and we praise Hashem. It was taken out. It was actually censored by the church. My understanding is it was actually put in there for the original idolatrous pagan nations. It was part of this declaration before Christianity. But when Christianity emerged and they were deifying somebody who was Yeshua, literally that was his name, somebody whose name was redemption. And we have this line that says they're bowing down to a God that cannot redeem. They took that very personally, and they said, you have to get rid of this. And you know, as Jews, we try to understand things in their context. We try to balance things out properly. And so for us, it's like, listen, you're threatening us with our lives for this one line. You know what? Okay, fine. We'll hide that to the side. We won't forget it. We just won't print it anymore in our books. And so it was removed from Sidurim, especially when we got to printed Sidurim. It was left out for a very long time. But it was always known that it was there, and there were always Sidurim printed that included that line. It has now started to make its way back into most contemporary Sidurim. Generally within the conservative and reform movements, it continues to be left out, as there is generally more of a universalist approach to the language. So often there will be words added or words taken away to ensure the broadest possible outlook. So some examples are, we talk about Oseh Shalom Bimromav, right? We all know the song, Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael, which means that God should make peace for us and for all of Israel. And so people have now added Ve'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel, and for everyone who dwells on the planet.
Oh.
Okay, you want to throw it in? Go for it. Is that part of it? No, that was never part of it. That is entirely a new addition that makes people who want to be, as politically correct as possible feel more comfortable. Wonderful. That's, I'm not going to say that's a wrong thing to do. I'm not going to say that's the right thing to do. I appreciate the value of the tefillot that we have. And for me, even when it comes to gendered languages, I think there's actually a lot of, I've studied and I've learned, there's a lot of depth to why the gendered language that exists. There's a lot of depth to why sometimes God is referred to as male. There's a lot of depth to why God is sometimes referred to as female. And there's a lot of depth to why we look to our forefathers and not necessarily our foremothers. And it's not about boys versus girls. That's never the issue. It is something that is far more archetypal, and also something that is far beyond the scope of this particular class. So maybe one day we'll do Why is God a He? We'll do that class, but not today.
So Rabbi, just one question going back to the Ayin and the Dalet. Mm-hmm. So is that, if not the entire reason, at least part of the reason, when the Shema Yisrael is recited out loud, you emphasize the Dalet on Echad?
That's part of the reason that you emphasize the Dalet, yes, is to make sure that it's clear it's Echad and not Acher. There is also, it's actually within Halakha, there's a meditation and a visualization that goes with the word Echad on every letter, to visualize the word or the letter, and on the Aleph to recognize. Aleph is the numerology of one, that God is one. That Chet is the numerology of 8, and so we're supposed to envision what is described as the 7 levels of heaven and earth. Right, so God exists simultaneously and in a unified form through all those 7 levels of heaven and earth. And so you're actually supposed to hold the chet a little bit. And then you're supposed to hold the daled a little bit. It's explicit. You're supposed to hold the daled for a little bit. And you're supposed to recognize that God exists in all 4 directions. Some people like to say all 4 dimensions that we have access to, right? Horizontal, depth, vertical, and in time as well as the 4th dimension. And we're supposed to almost visualize all that as we were saying the daled. Now here's an interesting thing. If we say the sound of a D, it's very hard to hold the sound of a D. So that's why you'll hear people going echad, right? Trying to like force out the loud D sound, but it's not holding it. It's just saying it louder. Now, if we look into more of an ancient Hebrew pronunciation, we all know, even in modern pronunciation, there are letters that have a hard sound and a soft sound. A bet with a dot is a b, and a vet, same letter without a dot, is a v. And we all know about a pay. The pay with a dot is a p, hard p, and a fey, same letter without a dot, is a f. Is that right? There's kaf, which is like the backwards C one, right? Is a k, and there's chaf. Without the dot is the more guttural ch. It's a softer sound. There were other letters that also had that dual nature to them. One is a gimel, which was gimel, and some people say gimel, others say gimel. It was like similar to a chaf, but trying to make a g, a gimel. And then there is the daled is one of them. And so daled with a dot was a d, like a d, and without a dot is like a th in the word the or them, right? You can hold that sound. It makes your whole head vibrate, and it feels really weird on your tongue. But you can hold the sound. And so really when the Shulchan Aruch was written in the probably late 1400s, early 1500s in Shvat, Yosef Karo would have been, when he said hold the daled, and when the Talmud said hold the daled, they were implying that the daled there does not have a dot in it. And so it should not just be echad, it should be echad. And you should feel that weird tingly feeling vibration on your tongue and in your head. So that's an interesting piece of Jewish pronunciation history. We can get it all into, that's a whole other thing. The way we pronounce Hebrew. Interestingly enough, so there were 2 other letters that had dual pronunciations. One is Resh. We're not actually sure what they were. Even Yemenites are not sure what they were. And they seem to hold the oldest traditions of pronunciation. The few opportunities are Resh, the way we do it in North America, Resh, the way they do it in Israel, and also a tooth rolling Resh. Just, I don't know where they would do that, but that's off the palate and the teeth, that it would be Resh, and Resh or Resh. Some combination of those would be the 2 pronunciations. The other one is often misused nowadays, which is a taf and a thaf, right? Thaf, just like the daled and the valed is like a th sound. So the other pronunciation of taf, right, with the dot was thaf, like a soft th sound, like with. So what happened? Why do we nowadays have some people who just say tough and tough, and the other who say tough and saf, right? Which we all know from Ashkenazis, right? Ashkenazit or Ashkenazis, right? And so that emerged because there's no th in a European dialect. So when Jews moved into Europe and fell into the Ashkenazi and Germanic and even the Polish dialects, and even the Lithuanian dialect, when we kind of moved into that whole realm, we lost the ability to pronounce the th, just like people in North America who don't grow up speaking Hebrew have a very hard time with a ch sound. Ch is an easy sound for anyone who grew up in the Middle East. I don't care what country, I don't care what language. Ch is easy because it's part of the natural dialect there. In North America, that's not part of English. That's not, right? In Europe, that's not part of the European dialect or the Northern European dialect. And so they never had the ability to do that ch sound. Similarly, in Europe, they didn't have the th. So what happened is you had two options that could come of it, and think back to your parents and grandparents, depending on how old they are, and where they came from. And if they were to say thank you very much, they will say one of two things: thank you very much or thank you very much. Because thank you doesn't really work, because their dialect, their mouth wasn't trained to work like that. So it's a mouth or a mouth, right? And so it becomes the same kind of thing, that the pronunciation got shifted to what people could do. So it became tough and tough, or tough and sus. That's kind of what went down there. Anyway, that's enough of Hebrew linguistic history, I think. One more?
Sorry, just if you don't mind, just one comment on that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of unusual when you talk about that fact that Europe didn't have that sound, but like when you think about it, many of the European languages evolved from Latin, which evolved from Greek, and the Greek evolved from Hebrew, right? You know, Aleph Bet Gimel is alphabet,
yeah.
You know, and the Greek letter is theta.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, so that came from tough, and it's interesting that it didn't actually progress into the Latin, that they didn't have that sound.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know enough about like global linguistics.
Yeah.
I know about Jewish linguistics a little bit. So I'm not totally sure where Greek evolved from. It's cool that it could have evolved from Hebrew. I've always known it's very clear there's always a relationship between them. But I never quite
just the, you know, like it's not A B C D, it's
right?
A B G D,
right?
You know, in both Hebrew and in Greek. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Anyways.
And it's 22 letters in each of those languages as opposed to 26 in the Latin alphabet. Anyway. Yeah, Ima, you wanted to.
I actually put a note in the and this may seem very far-fetched, but I just wonder about it. And can you? I know this isn't what the class is about, but the two different sounds. One is more with the tongue out, and one is sort of like the S, like the thuf or whatever you said turned into a sa, right, in the Ashkenazi form, and one causes the tongue to go out, and one you keep the tongue in. And I'm seriously wondering about the concept of a lisp. You know,
right?
people
Interesting.
Lisp, because actually, if you look, a lot of Ashkenazi Jews actually have a lisp, where the S, where the tongue goes out when you say the S sound. It's just a thought. I don't know.
Yeah, no, for sure. I don't know. That's it's an interesting idea. It's entirely true. An S sound comes from more the palate, and a T sound comes from the teeth. Right, having your tongue against your palate versus against your teeth. But it's even an S is close to the front of the palate, so it's interesting way to think about it. But again, you know, beyond the scope of right now, could be fun for another discussion. But everything is here, right? The kulaba. So anyway, let's try to get through this. You know, I don't want us to go on for too long. We went on for a little long last week. I think we did an hour and 20 last week. So we're gonna just try to move right along, right ahead. The next place we're gonna go is actually to our mincha tefillot, our afternoon tefillot. Mincha can be found on page 232 in the Art Scroll Siddur. As we've discussed previously, it begins with Ashrei. Mincha also being a time, it's generally in the afternoon towards evening, good opportunity to reflect back on the day that we had, or to reflect on the day that we are having and in the middle of. Mincha comes in the middle. We talked in our first class, this was established by Isaac, who went out to talk in the fields toward evening, right, the end of the afternoon. We said it corresponds to the second Tamid offering that was offered towards the end of the day of temple service, again, on behalf of everybody, of the entire nation. And this is what Mincha comes to represent. And so we started off with Ashrei, once again, declaring happy is a person who is dwelling in your house, Hashem, right? And that's Od Hallelujah Sela. That is what will keep us singing praises. The more we align ourselves with the fact that we are living in God's world, and the more we try to connect to that relationship and to that experience, the more joy, I suppose, and praise we can have for our lives, because we are able to look at the ups and the downs and recognize how that there's a lot of depth of meaning in all of it. Again, for more on that, please feel free to join us on our Wednesday class, the Delving Deeper, because we talk a lot about that kind of stuff there. In Mincha, though, remember, we're in the middle of the day. I don't have as much time in the middle of the day to kind of step away from what I'm doing for some deep contemplative meditation. So it's much shorter. We go straight from Ashrei and we jump directly into the Shmona Esrei, right? Again, the same 19 brachot, opportunities where we try to bring God into our lives and into our world and reflect on the life and the world that we are living in and through on any given afternoon. Same kind of thing. We go through the exact same blessings, but we are supposed to be changed from morning to afternoon. So we say it again, because even though the words might be the same, I'm not the same. The way I felt this morning is not the way I feel right now. And the way I feel right now will probably not be the way I feel this evening, because things will happen over the course of the day that will change my mood, that will change the things that I'm focused on and that I'm thinking about. A meeting that I had an hour ago could change the way I'm going to actually play out the rest of my day. I had my list, different priorities. I need to shift it around. And, that as all that shifts, so we have Mincha to do this kind of reevaluation, a midday meditation, if you will. Mincha, as well, after the Amidah, has Tachanun. That is, the Mincha Amidah goes from 2:34 to 2:48, and it is followed by Tachanun, which is 2:50 to 2:52. It is only the short version at Mincha. There's never the longer opportunity. Because again, Shacharit is how we're starting our day. It is really setting the stage for everything that's to come. So we spend a little bit more time involved in that experience and involved in developing and harnessing our physical relationship to God, our emotional, our intellectual, and our personal relationship to God. At Mincha, we're going through our day. So we're saying, listen, I need to revisit that emotional connection. So that's our Ashrei. And then I need to revisit that personal relationship to God. That's the Amidah. But when we come out of the Amidah, again, there's always going to be the sense of but I had so much to do. I was so distracted. This wasn't as connected to Hashem. This wasn't as deep a relationship as I would have liked it to be, because I was thinking about all these other things in the context of them themselves and not in the context of God's greater world. So, hey, Hashem, I wish I could be more connected to you in a real sense. And that's Tachanun, right? I wish I could be a little more connected. Please guard Israel. Please take care of me, take care of us. Let us have that relationship. Let us achieve all the things we want to achieve in the world, individually, collectively, as a nation, as a world, as a whole. And then we go straight into Aleinu. Aleinu, again, taking all of that stuff and saying, this was a dut. This is me declaring my faith in God, that God is Holy One, blessed be He, right? King of Kings, the only one to whom we bow down, etc., etc. That actually, we talked about it before, the missing line and the follow-up. It's actually one of the things that I always loved, is the biggest critique that some people have of God is, I don't see God. Where is He? I can't see Him anywhere. And meanwhile, when we think of idolatry, we think of people bowing down to a statue of some kind. And what I love about those two lines is, we say about people who are bowing to statues that they are bowing down to air, void, and nothingness. air, void, and nothingness has form in terms of this idol, in terms of this thing that they're bowing down to. And that's nothing, right? That's not a god. That is something of form, of substance. It's of substance. It can't be God. It is too limited in its own substantiveness. Whereas we go on and say, but we bow down to the Holy One, blessed be God, the King, King of Kings, who is above all things, who you can't see. Right? It's this interesting kind of paradigm where if you can see it, it is false. If you can't see it, it has more of a reality. Which there's a few like kind of turns like that in throughout the tefillot. That is one of the ones that I like and think about a lot. I see another question happening. Okay, so Monty, I'll take your question and then we're just going to proceed to the end. And
okay, it's just quick. So are there any congregations that you're aware of that do include that line still?
Yes, many.
Oh, there are?
Oh yeah, for sure. And in Israel, at least where I used to daven, it was just part of it. And even places that sing the same tune, right? The same Aleinu tune. They would include it there, right? Right there, they would just go on with the same flow. It's just part of it. Right, it's part of their tefillot.
Carry on.
Yeah. Anyway, so now we're moving along to Mariv. Mariv can be found in the Art Scroll Siddur on page 256. And Mariv, like I said, is the evening prayer. It is what we do after the sun has gone down, and it is the way we begin our night. But it is actually, as we discussed in the first class in the series, it is the first prayer of the day, because the Jewish day starts at night. Mariv is how we set ourselves up. We reflect on the day that we had, and we set ourselves up for the day or the night, and then the day that is to come. Right? Mariv is prospecting. Mariv is looking forward. Interestingly enough, Mariv and the section that we have in Mariv is actually the first thing that is discussed in the Mishnah. The Mishnah, which was the first compilation of Jewish behavior and custom, and I'm even going to say and social structure and culture. The first thing it talks about is the recitation of Shema for Mariv. And so it begins with two blessings. We have the Hurachum, we have the Baruch Hu, which really brings us into it. Again, Baruch Hu is a call to prayer, right? Lahavdil, to differentiate. It is similar to a muazzin that we all know from Muslims. If you've ever been in Israel and you have the call to prayer from their minarets, right? So Baruch Hu is the Jewish version of that. Anyway, we have Baruch Hu. We invite everyone to come pray, and then we go into the blessings of Shema. The blessings of Shema here are similar to the blessings of Shema in the morning, but they have to do with the evening. Instead of it being about the day rising up and the beginning of the day and bringing light into the world, it talks about a world that has both light and dark. And it talks about the idea of the evening is coming, and we're approaching night. But a lot of the same imagery, a lot of the same concepts exist at the beginning of Mariv as at Shacharit. And just like the introduction to the Shema at Shacharit is about developing an intellectual understanding of the God in front of whom we're about to declare is one, right? The God we're about to declare is one. So too, the introductory blessings in Mariv are for that same purpose, and then it brings us directly into the Shema Yisrael. We have the 3 paragraphs of the Shema Yisrael, once again declaring God's unity. Right? We did that in the morning. We're doing that again at night. We move through to have 2 concluding blessings, similar to in the morning where we only had one, but the idea of redemption, connecting the idea of God's unity to the idea of redemption in the world, which is why we get to Ga'al Yisrael, and also the idea of God as the God of our souls, who wakes us up in the morning and puts us to bed at night. That natural flow. Remember, all of this is connecting to a natural flow that exists in the world. So that natural flow, as it exists within our experience of waking up in the morning, going to bed at night, that we talk about at Mariv. Now, if we turn to 264, there's this other long section. It's a page long. Starts Baruch Hashem le'olam, Amen va'amen. This was something that was added later. It was added specifically for diaspora communities, and it was only maintained by Ashkenazi diaspora communities. But the extra level of prayer here is saying it is much harder to connect to the idea of God as Redeemer and as Hashem, as the one who is in charge of our lives when we wake up and when we go to sleep. It is harder to connect to that idea outside of Israel. Inside of Israel, there's a natural connection to it. Outside, it is harder to connect to that. And so therefore, we're adding this additional section in order to help us frame and focus our minds and our thoughts throughout our prayer. And that takes us then into another Amidah, into another Shmoneh Esrei, where again, we reflect on all the same ideas, but as we are now reflecting on them differently, as they apply to our evening time and to the nighttime ahead. And so we have that Amidah. Now, we mentioned it in our first class that Mariv is generally considered that historically it was optional. People didn't always do Mariv because it wasn't specifically connected to offerings in the temple. It was connected to clearing out the ashes from the Mizbeach, which was in preparation for the day ahead. And so not everybody engaged in that work. And so therefore, not everybody had to do it. However, over millennia, first centuries, now millennia, it has become accepted that Mariv is part and parcel of the Jewish prayer package. And therefore, we are now all obligated in Mariv because we accepted it as an obligation upon ourselves. And so that's why we have our 3 prayers every day. And Mariv then concludes on page 280 also with Aleinu, because Aleinu is this final summation, it's this final summary of all of our services. That is Shacharit, Mincha, and Mariv.
Rabbi?
Yes.
So why is there, hopefully it's a short answer, why is there never a repetition of the Amidah in Mariv? Is that simply one of those timing things? It's time to go to bed?
Yes. No, it's actually because of exactly what I said. It's because it's considered optional. And so it would be a tircha to do a repetition in an optional setting. The reason for the repetition at Shacharit and Mincha is in case somebody cannot pray on their own behalf. So you have the Chazan, the Shaliach Tzibur, who is going to say the prayers a second time on behalf of everybody, right? There's one that is personal, which is the first one, the silent one, and then there is the public out loud repetition for the community, for anybody who doesn't know how to pray or doesn't have a book or anything of that sort. Since Mariv is optional, is officially, even though we've accepted it and we consider it something that we must do, and it is just part of the way of Jewish living now, because it had that other status, at some point, we don't delay people for that purpose. There are a few interesting caveats about Mariv because of that reason. One is at Shacharit or Mincha, if it is Rosh Chodesh, and there's a paragraph that we add in called Ya'alev Yavo, and also on holidays, that paragraph, if you're going through your private Amidah and you forget that paragraph, depending on how far you got, there are different approaches, but we have to go back and we have to make sure we say Ya'alev Yavo. The idea is if we didn't say the Baruch Atah Hashem of the next blessing, we just go back to Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu Ya'alev Yavo and we say it there and move on. If we said God's name in the upcoming blessing, which is Hamachazir Shechinato L'Tzion, that God returns his presence into Tzion. If we said that blessing, or if even just said God's name in that blessing, so we would conclude the blessing, but go back to Ritzei, go back to the beginning of the paragraph that precedes Ya'alev Yavo. And if a person that finishes their Amida and moves their feet, already saying, I've finished my prayer, we're supposed to go back to the beginning and repeat the whole thing, because it shows we didn't have even enough kavanah, not even enough intention to simply state all the things that we have to state, right? So we have to go back and do the whole thing again and make sure we include Ya'alev Yavo. Now, in terms of timing, there have been many opinions. You can focus on the repetition, Ya'alev Yavo, and have that stand on your behalf, because the Shaliach Tzibur, the prayer leader, is saying it for everybody, so you can include yourself in that, and so you don't have to go all the way back, whatnot. At Mariv, if you forget Ya'alev Yavo, so you forgot it. Don't worry about it. It's fine. You'll say it in the morning, right? You can leave it. You don't have to worry about it. That's if you finished. If you catch yourself in the middle, you should still go back, but otherwise it's considered a tircha in the evening, and you don't have to go back at that point, because again, Mariv is optional and you're just beginning it, and so it's really primarily at Shacharit and Mincha where we need those declarations. So that is Shacharit, Mincha, Mariv. There are some other tefillot that we have for Rosh Chodesh. Maybe I'll include that next week in terms of additional prayers like Musaf, which we talked about previously briefly, for Shabbat and holidays, and even Rosh Chodesh, and also Hallel, which we say on Rosh Chodesh and holidays. And so we can maybe include those in one of our future classes on the how-tos of Jewish prayer. But right now, we're just moving through these services and the general structure of our tefillot. Please God, next week, we will almost be doing chazara, almost be going back to the beginning to do this all again. But as we go through it next week, we'll be moving through a little bit more quickly, and we'll be talking about when we stand and when we sit, and when we bow and how we bow, and when we move our feet and how we move our feet, and when we can have side conversations and when we should not. We're going to talk about all of the choreography of tefillah next week. So anyway, thank you again, everyone, for joining me this week for our how-tos on Jewish prayer. Once again, if you have any questions, please feel free. You can put them in the comments section, or in send them to me in an email if you have my contact information. If you are watching this on any social media app, or YouTube, Facebook, wherever, please give it a like, give it a share, tell people about it. It's always good to have everyone here. And on Wednesday, same time, 12 noon, please God, we will have the third installment of our delving deeper into Jewish prayer, which goes quite deeply into even one sentence, even a couple of words, just to really explore what are the deep emotional and psychological and spiritual underpinnings that drive the words of our tefillah, that drive our prayers, and what are our tefillot supposed to do to us, right? I've said today, I've said previously, the idea is if we go through a whole service and we don't feel changed after that service, we haven't actually gone through it properly. We need to have a little bit more intent, even if that change is minimal, even if it's just like, I feel a little better now that I did that thing, right? Even if it's just that, that's fine. But there should be some kind of connection to what we've done, and it should have some impact on us. And so that's really what our Wednesday class is all about. How can we deepen and expand the opportunities for that connection and transformation through the lens of tefillah, through the lens of Jewish prayer. Once again, thank you everyone for joining me. I am Rabbi David Grunland. This has been a how-to of Jewish prayer. I look forward to seeing you all soon and next time. Be well, stay healthy. Shalom.
Yasher koach.